if everything you see and hear doesn't pay anybody, then you've just killed the creative economy.
What does UNESCO say to this, Mathilde?
Depends on you, Mathilde. You've got a lot to say in Parliament, but it depends on
No
us
pressure,
making
Mathilde.
our case. So that's yes.
And Lily Allen, who's another singer, says, look, I make more money out of selling pictures of my feet on OnlyFans than I do from my music.
It's either that or you're going to have to start assessing the state of your feet, Mathilde.
Mike Rider Deep Talk. Menschen, Business, Diskussionen. Der Mike Rider Podcast.
Hi everyone, so welcome to a new episode of Mike Rider Deep Talk. Today we do a crossover with the beautiful people from the Last Human Voice podcast. They not only have probably the best podcast in English language about AI and the creative industry, but they are genuinely nice people to talk to. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Mathilde Pavie, an intellectual property rights lawyer specialized in new technologies, who among others is a consultant for the UNESCO, Annette Rizzo, a voice actress, a lecturer and teacher and a union activist, and Marcus Hutton, an actor, voice actor, and chair of the Equity Audio Committee. So today we'd like to talk a bit about the developments in AI so far and the differences between the UK and Germany, and maybe the similarities on the market. Since I already was a guest on their show, I was more than happy to return the invitation. So welcome to the show, guys and girls.
Hello.
Hello, thank you.
Thank you.
So let me catch you up real quick on what's been happening in Germany. You maybe have noticed the government has collapsed, basically. So that is, be that as it may, for us as a creative industry, that is not good. A new government has to be formed before any decisions can be made. And obviously, we're in mid of a recession and a crisis, 2 wars. So the feeling in Germany and the German-speaking countries is a bit like, and you want to talk about artists' rights right now? Really? So it's difficult. A lot is happening, but not on the official level we'd like it to. Maybe that is a good way to put it. How about the UK?
The UK, I think, is it fair to say that it's breathing an air of optimism? We have had also a change of government going from Conservative to Labour, which I think we're all hoping will mean a slightly more artist-orientated approach to AI. What do you think, guys? Is that fair?
I think it's what we're hoping. Whether or not the mood music is going quite the way we want it, certainly at the level we want it, is another matter. There's always that balance, isn't it, between trying to view us as artists, as workers, and Labour as a government should be very much about protecting our rights, but then saying, hey, the UK, particularly the UK outside the EU, is open for business, and whatever, we want to be a leader in AI innovation. And obviously one of the ways of doing that is to just say to the AI companies, come on in, have what you want. We'll be very, regulation light and very lenient. So I don't know. I think. Don't know. What do you reckon, Marcus?
Well, I think probably the same problem that's in Germany is that prioritizing our sector is we're always going to be kicked down the road because there's always some crises of one description or another daily, and there's been a huge backlash against this Labour government, probably from the more sort of right-wing contingencies. So for 4 months they've been firefighting. They've had the press against them. They've had they've had everyone against them. And of course, we have the background of the war as well here, but there are so many other things to deal with, which are to do with holes in sort of budgets and tax and everything else. So I think it's that thing of the sector itself having to shout for itself. Governments make vague noises, don't they, about we must support the creative sector and everything else. I mean, and I think increasingly there's a crisis in the creative sectors, which is going to loom up and bite many other sectors. I'm sure it's the same all over the world.
But at least I think it feels like it's going maybe a bit in the right direction, whereas on most places right now, it's going towards total free market frenzy and right-wing populism, whatever you may call that is not particularly artist or maybe human rights oriented. I don't know. Prove me wrong, please, everyone. So in Germany, far right is highly on the rise, and with labor at least, it seems like if the government is working and the workflow is established, you have someone to talk to who listens, at least.
Let's hope.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we might feel a little bit more hopeful because we've had many years under the Conservative government, and the starting point and our baseline for years up until this summer was that we had a government that was pro-AI innovation, which they interpreted to be light touch / no regulation, right? Which is a particular take, which is very much towards your free market. Let's not regulate unless we really must, and we have evidence that otherwise the market will crash, which was a bit of a contrast to the take in the line the EU followed with the EU AI Act and the previous copyright directives that followed in the work that may continue. So we kind of were looking at the EU and the EU bloc, including perhaps wrongly so, individual national governments within the EU as having a little bit more of an involved take on AI, including for the creative industries, compared to the UK that had just left the EU at the time those important and milestone regulations were going to be introduced, and therefore also the EU AI Act is not going to come over. So yeah, I think we had a bit of a no regulation approach is likely to hit the creative industries quite hard. Then the Conservative government kind of folds and opens up to elections, which gives us a Labour government, which is hinting at regulation, but we still have we don't have any concrete plans, and this is why we're a bit lost to give you a more concrete answers as to what's happening in the UK. Well, we have rumours and we have hints, but we don't have a detailed plan. Forget about even that turned into policies or regulations proposal. We don't have anything apart from we think the Labour government will be more into regulating and intervening than the previous one, but it's not much of a commitment.
We've gone back to square one, effectively. I mean, we know that in the last couple of weeks they've only just formed the committee who will re-look at this. So they're probably as in the dark as we are. And the problem is we've had no continuity for the last 6 years. Government changes, minister changes. It kept happening with the Conservative government. So there was nobody sort of looking at this over time. And hopefully Labour, at least if they get one term, can at least be consistent going all the way through. I know that that's the plan, I'm told this, but the plan is not to keep having these changes of committees, changes of personnel.
And we do have another bit of bright news, which is that our very own Dr. Mathildes Füßen will be among the voices giving evidence to an upcoming select committee. So I would consider that to be a win, actually.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Yes,
amazing.
She's a good person to know.
Yeah.
Tell me more. Can you tell me more? Can you tell us more?
Yeah, because the information is public. So this will be my first time being involved in this sort of proceeding. So it's essentially the parliament. And there were more than one committees formed to look at the impact of AI, and some of them in the creative industries and split across different working groups, which actually doesn't help because you don't know who's doing what and where. And that's a bit of a challenge for us who are really keen to follow the debate and then contribute to it where needed. So this time it's the parliamentary committee looking at the state of high-end television and film. So it's quite focused. And it has noted the need to look at AI as part of a broader piece of work on the health of that ecosystem and those industries. And so they've invited me alongside other experts, including equity, actually. I believe Liam Budd, who's in charge of their negotiations, will join to hear on evidence. And what that means is that they have a list of pre-prepared questions that they will have put together based on other special advisors' advice and input, as well as other experts they may have heard before, and they feel like they're needing contributions or more insight on particular subjects, and then we find out on the day. So it's like game on. We'll see where their head is at based on that session and the questions they ask. And then at the end of this whole thing, usually there's a report which is supposed to provide a fairly transparent account of conversations had, with whom, questions asked, the answers that they received, what they conclude in terms of what we should do next, regulations or otherwise. And I'm very curious to see what it's at. But that's really focused on film and high-end TV, which is, I think, a really interesting area, but only one of the many sectors within the creative industries, of course. So it'll be interesting to see what other work happens around music, around other performing arts, and other creative expressions and so forth.
Yeah, I think what we're hoping for from an equity point of view, well, I'm certainly hoping for anyway, is that there can be more sort of nuanced discussion about impacts, because one of the things that happened in the last government, and one of the defences was put up for not regulating, was that we don't know what the impacts are. There's too little kind of evidence of that. But I do think because of the march of the speed of AI, we certainly as a union, we can start now to show impacts, because it's impacting our members. Obviously, in the voice sector, it's been particularly present. But I think that, there's still not much quantitative data out there about impacts. Is that the same in Germany, in Austria? Does that...
To be honest, I wanted to ask, have you been asked to provide data? I don't know, in whatever shape or form that may be, because we haven't even been asked. We haven't even been aware as a problem on the highest levels that may want us to contribute, to say, well, we have, I don't know, media salaries from 2020 to 2024, and they denigrate like that, or whatever that may be. So, yeah, is there something like that?
Well, from the union end, we're trying to collect data. The audio committee is on a data gathering exercise at the moment. I've been collating bits of sort of surveys and things that have come from other places. And you've got to go out there and ask people, have you been impacted by AI? By how much? How is your salary going? I mean, I've got a folder full of stuff. I mean, I think the general consensus around the creative industries, I mean, I don't know if you're we've had a thing this week, for instance, which is that Kate Nash, who's a music quite a famous singer, has basically done quite a smart thing politically, which is that she basically says, I now make no money from music. I can't make any money from tours. So I'm now selling myself on OnlyFans. She said, because I make more money from OnlyFans than I do from music in order to pay my creative workers. Now, of course, people are having a sort of fainting moral fit over this on Twitter and everything else. So it's been quite a smart move. And Lily Allen, who's another singer, says, look, I make more money out of selling pictures of my feet on OnlyFans than I do from my music. These are multi-million pound selling artists. I think it's kind of taking stunts like this and sort of desperate measures to highlight. I mean, I read a report yesterday which said that in fine art, for instance, average incomes are down by 40% since 2010. And that can be translated across every single sector. Everybody's feeling the pinch. They don't know how much AI is affecting things, but someone's got to put all this data together. I mean, Mathilde, do you fancy writing a paper on the value of creative labour? Because somebody needs to.
It's either that or you're going to have to start assessing the state of your feet, Mathilde.
And I have a bit of a feet phobia, so count me out for that.
I'd have to pay people to look at my feet, I think. Anyway, go on. So,
I'd pay people for them to not look at my feet.
But this is so. Look at Marxist theory or whatever. Creative labour has always been incredibly difficult to sort of place in the sort of labour-industrial relations, sort of capitalist sort of philosophy and thinking. But what's obviously clear is that the more content you create for free that is run by platforms, is the less attention is put on traditional broadcast media and stuff which actually pay people a wage and has collective agreements and everything else. And then an AI is effectively turbocharging that. I mean, I read something the other day that said that there'll be a 90% increase in sort of social media output because of AI by 2026. And over the next 10 years, that's projected to be a 10 times greater output. So the more content that is out there, the less time people spend kind of consuming media in the traditional way, the less value it has. So you've got a sort of situation where creative labour is becoming valueless.
Mm.
And of course, from a union point of view and a UVA point of view and everything else, that's what we're fighting with.
Yeah, we're fighting for that too. But I think at the moment we still have leverage because
Yes.
they still need our data and they still need our likenesses, our pictures, our songs, our spoken word, whatever that may be. At least that's what we're experiencing. I don't know how much I can go into detail because it's ongoing negotiations. But with UVA, we are negotiating with multiple major, like global players in the games industry, common Europe-wide AI clauses at the moment, and that is what we dreamt of, so to speak. And they came to us. So it's not like we tried to bully them. We couldn't, but the solidarity in the creative industry was so big this year that enough people decided not to sign working contracts without proper AI protection, that production processes went into slowed down or came to a halt. And that's when they approached us and said, well, could we negotiate something Europe-wide at least, because that is one set of rules, so to speak. However, how many questions the AI Act may leave open, but still, versus the US, versus I don't know, the Asian. The main point where we're still debating and battling and negotiating is the training data usage, the usage of our work as training data. It's not a problem. There's all good when they want to clone you, when they want to whatever, all excluded, all can be negotiated extra and with proper remuneration and control and everything we've talked about the last time when I've been on your show, and I'm sure you've been going on about in your respective areas of work. All good, but the usage of my work as training data is the pain point or the pressure point. Have you experienced something similar?
Well, yeah. I mean, you know, one of the great things about UVA, obviously, is the fact that we have a network now that we can sort of tap into. I'm still chipping away equity to try and get a more formal relationship. I sent another email this week. But, you know, so we were pleased as a union this week to support French and Spanish artists over the two Nintendo jobs that are out in the world, which, you know, have bad AI clauses, and the fact that Spanish and French artists are refusing to work on those titles, and the fact that they've started recruiting in the UK for French and Spanish resident voices here. At least we can't tell them not to work. We can't, you know, we don't have the power to do that, but we can at least highlight the issue. And that is the great thing about UVA and about having sort of global networks where we can all stand up for each other. And at the moment, that's kind of feels like that's all we can do. But I mean, more because I think there's a misunderstanding in the UK, perhaps, and certainly in America, about how negotiations are carried out in Europe, because it's not unions necessarily. It's quite often associations and guilds that actually are coming to the table. So I think in Spain they have. Is it PAVAS? What's the name of the alliance of associations? PASAVE, sorry. PAVAS, honestly. Yeah, PASAVE. So,
all good.
But normally in the UK, we think that only unions have this ability to collectively bargain, but actually PASAVE are mostly associations, aren't they, I think, or guilds?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But there's also says something about there's a screaming need for those companies that actually want to get legislation, but want to get contracts passed. They need someone to talk to. And obviously, you know, since UBA put its hand up and said we exist, people have come to you because, there is someone we can talk to. That's an impressive list of, blimey, we don't want to, you know, you've got 35 different guilds and associations or whatever.
37 now.
30, well, okay, well, exactly. You know, You really, really don't want to pay off 37 representative bodies. So no wonder they want to talk to you.
And that's the point. Representative bodies, they want to talk to whoever represents the guild, the branch, the people who work in the industry. And often it's not labor's unions, for example, but associations, guilds, however you may call them. And the amazing thing is for me to see, as you said, we cannot force anybody to do anything, but we can educate people, we can advise people, we can say, well, in our humble opinion and our lawyers' teams, legal staff's humble opinion, it would not be wise to sign these contracts because this, that, and that could happen or would be the consequences. You decide, you're a grown-up, and that does the trick enough to put up pressure from the production side to come to us, and that's great.
Patrick, talking, going back a little bit to the training data, you shared an article with us that was by 2 law professors in Germany, and they make the case that data mining and AI training on content is actually copyright protected. It is, if they do it without our say so, it is an infringement. So, I mean, we've only read the abstract, which is in English, but can you give us the highlights of it, and maybe we can talk a bit about what the significance of that might be for all of us.
Sure. Yeah. So this is in German we would call it a tandem study. So a study from the law side and the IT side together, which hasn't been done before, as far as I know. So either one or the other was studied and written about. And these 2 renowned professors in their field from Germany have come to the conclusion that there are multiple points, 3 if I'm not mistaken, where the training and the text and data mining, as far as they're concerned, would be copyright infringement. I have to be careful what I'm saying here because it's not neither a verdict nor a law nor a highest court has approved that, but it's a scientific research that is in the peer review process at the moment. They're arguing that for systems to be trained, data has to be copied, and this copy already can be considered copyright infringement as long as it's not for pure scientific or research reasons. And they put up the question, well, is providing data, for example, data sets for a client selling publicly available data, a scientific or a research purpose? In their opinion, it is not. Then we have a court case that says otherwise in Germany now against Lion, but the first court instance, so to speak, argued exactly that, has research purposes, so to speak, and that is why TDM.
Just picking up on what you just said about TDM. This was my initial concern, because when I first was aware of text and data mining exception in the UK, which was probably 4 or 5 years after it had actually been brought in. It'd been brought in 2014 in line with the EU. It just seemed obvious to me that if you're doing scientific research, it's going to be monetized at some point. And there was this but there was this distinction put between the 2 things. So
they're pointing a finger at the problem that scientific research is not properly defined.
Yes.
So is providing masses of data for clients against money scientific research? Well, it's not defined, and courts have to decide on that. And the other thing is that is a bit more complicated, but the TDM exception only applies when a specific aspect of, for example, a picture is used for said research purpose. So if I have a picture with a couch with a background, I only need the couch to learn my algorithm how to build to show me a picture of a couch better. But with AI training, it's always the whole data that is used. So that is also not properly TDM exception applicable. And the third thing is the training happens obviously outside the EU, mostly in the US or maybe in other countries, which make our copyright laws not applicable in that moment. But as soon as the company is making the material available through their application, through the browser, so say ChatGPT, give me the song text of, I don't know, whatever, Adele's song, and it's being replicated one-on-one, 100% identical, then it's a copyright infringement again. And that is possible. They have proven that, and that is why another lawsuit started recently, where the GEMA, the entity that is in charge of musicians' distributions rights, is suing OpenAI for exactly that, because they could reproduce multiple lyrics from famous songs just by prompting, well, tell me the lyrics of whatever X song.
But this is in Germany, isn't it? So we have the same problem with, I mean, obviously since the UK has exited the EU, the big question is, you know, the EU has a suite of performers' rights, which I understand, even though they've got them, very little has been, you know, there's no court cases or anything else. You've got all this fantastic new, from our point of view, from this side of, you know, the English Channel, or the French Channel, whichever nationality you are. The channel. We're very envious of the protections that EU artists have. We're very annoyed that we missed getting them by 6 months. But the big question is can we take advantage of German legislation, for instance, if our rights are being infringed in Germany? And I think this is going to be a big question, isn't it, about data that has been trained in America or South America or China or whatever, infringing copyright in Germany. So who's challenging who? Does that mean that there's a kind of challenge from the tech community to say, well, go on, turn us off then. Turn us off in Germany. And if you do turn them off in Germany, does that give, you know, populist politicians even more reason?
I think the GEMA does not aim at shutting off ChatGPT, not at all. This follows a line of events that one could say they gave them all benefits of the doubt and all the good faith possible. So the GEMA issued a collective opt-out in early 2023 already for their whole artists catalog. So everybody they represent, they reserved their rights and opted out of and did that machine readable and in every possible way. And nothing happened, so to speak, no reaction, and you could still make available song lyrics and whatever on AI platforms, even of songs that came out later. So, and the other thing in I think in September 2024, they made a licensing proposal. They said, well, we know it's been used for training.
You're still scraping when we asked you not to.
You're still scraping.
Yep.
Exactly. You're ignoring our opt-out. Well, then at least let's make a bargain and monetize it. And when that also was ignored by OpenAI in specific, they started to sue. So it's not like nobody wants to shut anybody down. It's just the way our society works when actions are being ignored, and constructive or playing by the rules does not help. What does an opt-out help me if it's being ignored, if it's being bypassed?
Can I ask a question, Mathilde? So if you scrape data in the US under fair use, does that I mean, where does an international treaty come in there? How does that invalidate? I mean, this is what I can't understand. I mean, it's like being scraped in Germany is one thing, but being scraped in America is something else. How does that work?
So it's a good question with no straightforward answer. It's also, that question is being faced in the UK by the company Getty Images that is suing the company, the US-based company Stability AI, for its image generator tool called Stable Diffusion, for infringement of the images, the rights of which they hold, that has been used to train that particular tool, Stable Diffusion, without permission, without license. And also no opt-out needed, because UK law doesn't know the opt-out regime. It has unless it's for non-commercial research purposes, which in this case for Stable Diffusion, it would be a very hard argument that I think has not even been made or attempted by the company. So, and that court is facing that question. So first, under US law, it's not been confirmed that the use of rights protected content in that way for a step 1, data collection, mining, cleaning up, and then training of the technology, step 2, is an act of fair use. That is still a question, a point of law that is under judicial scrutiny. There have been several lawsuits. Some have failed, not because the argument, the claims was not in good standing. It's just that it was formulated wrong, or it was not introduced into court or following proceedings that would lead to a successful case. So we're still working that out on the US. In the UK, same questions with the fair use or fair dealing doctrine that's even narrower than the US. So which standard do you pick? That depends on the court based on which law they believe should take precedent. The two countries should have fairly harmonized rules because they're part of the same treaties, the Berne Convention and the following, on fair use. And we don't know. The answer is a court in the UK could decide to apply UK law to infringing activities happening outside the UK should they feel like there is another way to link the dispute to the UK through another means. Like, for example, the materials created in the UK, primarily exploited in the UK. Another example could be the law is declared to be of public policy, therefore public order, which we see a lot happening in the UK. If a law is declared of ordre public, it means that it can be applied, the local law can be applied to a judge in that jurisdiction if they felt compelled to do so for moral or public interest reasons. It's not as often used in the UK, but it's very much used in France, at least. I don't know about Germany. So it could be that UK law remains and applies to a case brought in the UK by UK claimants, even if the infringing activity is happening in a foreign country like the US. It's impossible to predict before going in.
But it's going to take some legal challenges for us to have any precedent set. That seems to be our ongoing problem.
And it's expensive to get that type of legal certainty through courts as opposed to through another means. And this is why I think the licensing agreements are growing and having more and more legs, because it's also more attractive for an AI developer, especially smaller ones, to make licensing agreements and bypass that whole legal uncertainty and risk of litigation entirely from the beginning. And this is what gives me hope, is that kind of second wave of AI developers that we're seeing after the Big Four came out with their tools aimed at the mass consumer market rather than the market of professionals in the creative industries. And that second wave is proposing tools that's more in line with values of the sector. Like, the model is clean, it's trained on completely licensed data, and it's delivering quality outputs to your standards as professionals, etc. But we need that second wave of AI developers to continue to sustain and to stand the competition they may face, across Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, and their suites of tools. And governments should kind of try to encourage that competition in the right direction, I think, because I'm guessing they're the ones that come to you, Patrick, at UVA.
Well, governments not really, but big
Not
players on the
governments,
industry, big players in the industry.
Yeah, second wave of we want to use AI right, and that means coming to you and get the permissions. It's not OpenAI, it's not Alphabet, it's not those, but it's that more applied, kind of fine-tuned almost to the creative industries type developer that are coming through. Like Getty Images is that, right? Is doing that as well.
I was going to ask you, Patrick, with the opt-out clearly being problematic already, who could have foreseen that? If it's already causing problems, either because people aren't understanding how they can invoke their rights, or, as has been the case here, the opt-out has been selected, as it were, but it's been ignored. Is there any appetite, or do you think there could be any appetite in the EU to revisit that part of the Act and to move away from opt-out to an opt-in model, or are we past that in the EU?
I'd love to say yes, to scream yes loud and clear into the microphone, because that is the feeling on the industry side at least. But I can't tell you. I have the feeling, it's only a subjective feeling, that we haven't yet proven enough that an opt-out is worthless if it's being ignored. So, and that makes me feel quite powerless, actually. We already stepped down from informed consent, opt-in, the things that are come to mind naturally when a new, very disruptive technology emerges. And we have already settled on the compromise that big tech wants us to settle on, which is it's in my responsibility to make them not use my data, and then it's being ignored. So it's
Yeah, that's kind of extraordinary, isn't it? The one,
they have proposed it. It's not like we wanted the opt-out for and they don't know how to apply it or whatever.
What concerns me is, do Google, OpenAI, and Alphabet? We talk about kind of new markets and competition, and and having healthy competition and all of that stuff, and that's stuff that the EU and the UK government and everybody else is supposed to regulate on. But the big, deep pocket power players, do they really want? Do they really want lots of competition going on in their space,
or do they not?
Well, of course not. Exactly. So they were, and all eyes have to look to America, to Silicon Valley. Now, that's. I don't mind lost human voice anyway. Our side being a little bit political, but now that Trump is in, and now that sort of you've seen sort of Sam Altman, and you've seen Zuckerberg and everybody all sort of cozying up to Trump, previous sort of Democrat supporters. That is kind of scary, is when you've got government in league with the huge players. And does that? I wonder whether that means game over, actually. And I wonder, all of this noise about AI innovation and creating opportunity for AI companies, well, I'm just wondering whether the big players are really just, the end game is just to stamp all over all that anyway.
You can't believe and think like that and still be a union activist, Marcus. How do you get up in the morning? You're just so resigned and pessimistic.
Well, I'm not. But it's a sort of zero-sum game. I've been reading a lot of Varoufakis about techno-feudalism and cloud capitalism lately, so I'm slightly indoctrinated at the moment. But beginning to realise that as creatives, right down at the bottom of the food chain, we cannot operate anymore. We simply cannot operate without being on platforms. We can't engage with the world at all. And that's raised this many, many times. So you're kind of, I hate the expression, but you're sort of in the matrix. You can't get out of it. You cannot get out of it. And then everybody's desperately trying to stop from drowning. So they're creating more and more content. The more content you create with kind of free creative labor means that and then AI exacerbating that. So you've got this sort of, it feels like they've already won, really.
How do you cope? How do you cope with that, Marcus?
Well, not well.
With a lot of chocolate and
I'm asking for a friend.
A lot of chocolate. Yeah,
I'm asking for a friend.
I can tell you how I cope with that. I got together with some friends and I started a podcast.
Yes, exactly. Well, we're doing this. Exactly.
Yeah. That is good.
But I think it's worth raising, because I think that so many people are fighting, including small AI startups and everybody's fighting for their little smidge of the market, their little slice of the pie, not realizing that perhaps the pie was sewn up quite a few years ago. This idea that there is a market. Well, in fact, the big companies own the markets. They own the marketplaces. So, you're sort of operating on their rules, really. Mm-hmm. If you're a small AI startup, you can't promote your business, you can't sort of engage with the world without operating through Google, for instance. So there's not separation there. You're not an alternative to Google. You're just sort of part of the Google machine in terms of trying to get your own products away. And that becomes a bit of a... So that then comes down to monopolies. That then comes down to, is the EU Parliament, Commission, whatever, going to start breaking up monopolies? Should that be in order to kind of have a freer, fairer marketplace and everything else? Do you start to break up the sort of the tech monopolies? There doesn't seem to be that much conversation about that in the AI space. Mathilde, am I wrong?
That's happening. I think that's happening at least more than because it sounds familiar. It feels familiar.
Well, in the EU, we hear it. We hear it in the UK that the EU is very concerned about this, that they're fining big companies, they're trying to break them. But we don't hear it in the UK at all.
Okay, that's a pity.
So much. And actually, the US was leading an interesting, line of lawsuits and litigation work under the Biden administration on market concentration in tech, right? This is why Chrome is being requested to separate out from Google and be sold. And there were ongoing litigations. The change in administration in the US is catastrophic for this type of work. And we'll see what comes of that. I 100% agree there's a market concentration problem to be looked at, and that's the foundation of most problems. I think AI is compounding pre-existing systemic problems that sees the consistent extraction of wealth from workers to corporate through online platforms, through the dataification of our work, of creativity, of culture, so that it can be packaged in a way that you don't need the worker or even so much of the consumer anymore. It can have value and live on beyond any human involvement, which is kind of tragic and depressing, but a reality.
These are my two favourite words that my family are very bored of me. I shake my head and say, broken system. Broken system.
Yeah, broken. Well, I read a statistic the other day. So I looked up the British Association of Marketers, and they, again, this is impact, interesting. 78% of the marketers surveys said that they would use AI for most of their marketing within the next year. Now, that is up from 20% 2 years ago. And they've said because it hasn't had a significant impact on profits or anything else, it's making much easier. They can generate much more content. They haven't got labor costs anymore. You don't need to employ a voice artist to stick an AI voice on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there was a quote in it that was really interesting in this survey. It said that 50% of those marketers could no longer see the value of human interaction in the creation of this content. Now, sorry, let's just put the two things together. So you've got all these content creators creating content for free so that advertisers can advertise. There's opportunities for advertising. Our work has largely been our pay has largely been in that advertising. Now that advertising is not going to pay either. So we've now got a situation where pretty much everything you see and hear, including this podcast, we are doing it, we are being content creators ourselves. If everything you see and hear doesn't pay anybody, then you've just killed the creative economy, which is huge. I don't know what it is in Germany, but it's 125 billion in the UK. So I'm being doomsday about it, but that seems to be the direction of travel, and it seems to be not being talked about. Although I saw Bo Burnham, rather brilliant comedian, talking about this the other day.
Yeah, I partially agree with that because, generally speaking, you're right. But I think what we're missing here is that only works as long as these systems are
able to
largely for free and or cost very, very little. And the AI industry makes I don't know how many hundred thousands of billions of minus every year, and is far from being profitable even within the next, 5 years or so.
Is that where our hope is then, Patrick?
And my personal hope is that it's an internet bubble all over again. At least it's bursting and 4 mega corporations survive and everybody else leaves us alone, please. And we get back to work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, but honestly, this works. What you described, Marcus, works only if it's almost
cheap.
free. It's cheap. It's very cheap. and no quality is needed that speaks for the content when it's not relevant whether it's made by a human or by an algorithm. So I think at some point the AI industry has to transition from relying on investments to surviving on their own profit. And I hope that will be the breaking point for many of these corporations. Do you agree? Or
I agree. No, I agree. And I think it's all fine asking the questions, but I think as a community, particularly the creative sector and with lawyers, we need to start. I mean, this is where Mathildes fantastic is offering solutions. What does a better marketplace look like? What does better business look like? What do we need to see to happen to that happen? And does the sort of doomsday scenario have legs? And increasingly, I think it does. So I'm not just throwing my hands up and saying it's all over. I'm just saying that unless I just think.
Plus another thing, Marcus, let me add another thing where I can circle back to the training data, because at the moment we get at best average results, and the results are either platforming, like plateauing, or declining. And it's clear that they need high quality training data input. That's where we come in when we're protective of our data, and we can sell it to the corporations on our terms, or at least on fair terms. There can be high quality output, makes being in the creative industry survivable.
But what that means is we had this conversation in the last post. It means as individual artists owning our data, not having, because the second we start to sort of broker the ownership of our data through platforms, we're into the platform problem again. You've got the platform is the landlord. So this is where my problem is. Unless there was some sort of collectively, if publishers are controlling the data, if publishers are selling the license, so this is obviously what, if we want to see a licensing model, we've had this conversation before, the licensors are still making a decision on behalf of the creatives about what that looks like. If we have to go for a platform to a platform to own our own digital content, to sort of make sure that it's licensable, it's the platform's terms that do the licensing. This is, and that platform itself will have to coexist within Google or Amazon or whatever it might, whatever it might be. So just saying that there's no way to get out of it. That's the thing that I'm finding deeply frustrating. I think most artists want to control their own data, and they want complete control over their own data, not to have to sort of offset that to an intermediary to do a 50-50 profit share with, to, everything else. It's extremely difficult. And that's a tech problem. That's a tech problem that could be solved, but I don't know how it's going to get solved. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now.
What does UNESCO say to this, Mathilde?
Oh, that's a great question. So we'll find out soon, I hope. Mainly because UNESCO as an organization is only carrying sort of the voices of its member states. So that I'm aware of, it's the main commitment they've put so far on that question is that they are for a rights-based approach to AI development. So they're very much pro-artist rights, which would include consent, etc. But that's as far as they've gotten to date. And there are in 2025 a number of key kind of rendezvous for UNESCO member states, because we'll have a string of really high level meetings. So the G7, G20, and what is called another conference called Mondial Cult, which is where all of the ministries of cultures gather that are part of the UN, and then discuss like the main issues. And AI will feature on it very, very prominently. And I'm hoping that at the end, so towards mid-2025, we'll have a clearer line of what the international consensus is. What I know so far is that we have a bit of a division between, I would say, very broad brushly speaking, global north and global south. Global south countries are very keen to see consent, opt-in, rights-based approach, and have their artists' rights protected fiercely and staunchly. in the face of AI innovation because they feel like they've been there before and they don't want to be cheated out of that innovation in that, runway that other countries have enjoyed so far. They're also very aware that most of the AI innovation and therefore quote unquote unfair competitive advantage that is being gained is by the US and China, as well as other smaller AI players, but is not involving developing countries or countries in development in the global south. And in the global north, we have countries like so far the UK and the US have said we're not going to commit to anything in terms of data mining, fair use, anything like that, until and unless there's an international agreement. The average time it takes to make or have one of those international treaties come into being is between 25 and 55 years. So we can't wait for that. So it's a question of do you really mean that? Or is that a delaying tactic to see how much you can reap in that limbo state that we're on so that then, you can make commitments later where it doesn't cost you much because you've already reaped the rewards of having been first, basically. So we'll see if the UK will keep in an alignment with the US on that, because it could be that the new government will break away a bit from that alliance, because that's what the US wanted, I think in line with what the UK wanted, but the EU is well, we do want, artists' rights being protected. So they were a halfway house between then the global south countries that were clear, we need rights, we need consent, we need permissions, we need licensing agreements in place that work for everyone. And actually this stress, we also need it in a way that goes beyond what the limited copyright and performance rights framework offer, because those systems and those concepts don't work for us. We have community-based ownership. We have very different types of creative expressions that are not well represented in current international tools because those were decided and written by you. And they are the global south countries are very much in line with what a lot of artists, creative workers are experiencing and feeling and asking for in the Europe, the US, and so forth. So I'd be interesting to track that. The next presidency for the G7 is important because it was Italy, it's now going to be Canada. Canada is not likely to put culture on the agenda. So it may be that AI and culture will fall by the wayside for that group, but then it'll be picked up again by France, who's keen to have culture on the agenda. So they see, how can we manage that Canada layover, so to speak, in a way that doesn't create delay in that conversation. So it's a lot of moving pieces on that front and not a lot of commitment so far.
I think that's quite an interesting and not completely gloomy point at which we could probably think about wrapping. If we come together in another few months' time, as I suspect we may well do, Patrick, what does the next stage look like to you? Do you think in from where you are in the UVA and in Germany and Austria?
I'd love to tell you about a big agreement with one major or global player on a Europe-wide AI protection clause. That would be amazing for me and the industry, obviously. And I think the last word on opt-out is not spoken yet. I'm using German language, trying to make it an English metaphor here. I don't know if that works, but I'm remembering a presentation of a rather big German book publisher a few weeks ago, who presented in front of high personnel of the Justice Ministry live scraping of. So they had two computers and they uploaded for the first time a new book and new content to the internet and did everything opt-out, machine readable, everything thinkable and unthinkable to protect it. And on the other computer, a person 3 minutes later had the summary of said book.
Wow.
And the people from the German Justice Ministry were furious. So the words theft were used, and because they relied on that. So the industry told them, no, this is the thing, the opt-out. If we get the opt-out, everything is good. We're going to respect that. And they proved that nobody's respecting it, not even generally, but in real time. So within 3 minutes,
wow.
not exaggerating. So if we can manage to prove again and again that this opt-out system is not working for whatever reasons, it has to be revisited. It has to. It's what else do we have in Europe but artists and cultural and heritage? And I don't have to tell you, but we're not like the US, for example. So, and I think we can make ourselves heard and make our case that the system, how it's working now, it's not working for us.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So I'd hope for a change in that to wrap that up.
And good luck with
you?
this paper. I mean, I really hope this paper gets a good peer review and finds its way into court.
I'd like to think that we will have moved on 6 months, not 6 minutes from where we are now, because that always seems to be the case. Time passes and everything moves so slowly. I would like to think that as you said, you from your side in Europe will have the evidence. But given that we in the UK are looking at replicating this opt-out that is not working, I would like to think that we can at least have an agreement at some level in government that they're going to look at it and they're going to seriously consider the opt-in rather than the opt-out. And I know that depends on the work that you're doing, but it also depends on us, particularly individually. It depends on you, Mathilde. You've got a lot to say in Parliament, but it depends on us
pressure,
making
Mathilde.
our case. So that's my opinion, that in 6 months' time that we're actually shifting the conversation from, of course it's going to be opt-out to, it might be opt-in.
Mm.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, what I would like to see happening in the UK is I'd like to see this government formulate some kind of policy and put some sort of plan into action in the next 6 months. And it's not like they have to start from scratch. They've got the EU AI Act to look at. They've got plenty of stuff that they can look at. So I hope in 6 months' time we can say, good or bad, but hopefully good, this is what is happening here. I mean, in fact, bad is not a bad thing, because if something's bad, we've all got something to make some noise about. But I hope the UK will have a direction of travel.
For me, I'd like to see industrial agreements in place in about 6 months' time, especially from the leading voices. I'm thinking of equity and pact and maybe musicians' unions and, across the board. Those are conversations that are happening. I would love them to see, I'd love to see them progress a bit like we've seen in the US with SAG-AFTRA and the Writers Guild. So that's one. The other, I'd love to see government weight put behind collective solutions, as in increasing the exchange and the diplomacy between the tech industry and the creative industry in the UK to see AI work for creative workers as opposed to AI dumped on or squeezing creative workers. And I think that will come in the form of you need to put in public money into that type of tech. So we have an alternative solution. You need to put in the legislation or regulation where is needed so that the new entrants to the market that are trying to do it right don't face an anti-competitive advantage compared to the big players. That sort of more creative, strategic thinking. That would be my wish.
Thank you. It was a real delight talking to you. And although dark at times, it still gives me hope to chat with fellow-minded and like-minded people and to see that something happens in the industry. And so thank you to you two who have been listening to this episode up until now. You're great. Should you have thoughts or messages, just email me at deeptalk@mike-rider.com. And as always, I'd love for you to rate the podcast, to spread the word, and share the episode with your friends and your thoughts with me. Thank you. See you in 2 weeks' time. Bye.